Volodymyr Zelensky has posted a video of himself visiting an island that became a symbol of Ukrainian resistance as the war enters its 500th day. At the start of the war, Ukrainian soldiers defending Snake Island famously defied an order from a Russian warship to surrender. The Black Sea island was seized by Russia, but later reclaimed by Ukraine. In a video, the Ukrainian president called it a place of victory that would never be reconquered. In the undated clip posted on Telegram, Mr. Zelensky described it as proof that Ukraine would return every inch of its territory taken by Russia since the full-scale invasion began on 24 February 2022. I want to thank from this place of victory, each of our soldiers for these 500 days, Mr. Zelensky said in the video in which he was shown arriving on the island by boat and leaving flowers at a memorial. The Ukrainian president later announced the return home of 5 former prisoners of war captured by the Russians during last year's siege of the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. They had been in Turkey since September 2022 after being freed from Russian captivity as part of a wider prisoner exchange. Russia's Black Sea Fleet flagship Moskva sailed to Snake Island within hours of the start of the war and ordered Ukrainian soldiers on the island to give themselves up. I suggest you lay down your weapons and surrender to avoid bloodshed and needless casualties. Otherwise, you will be bombed, said a Russian officer. The Ukrainian response and verbal exchange went viral, as a soldier replied, telling the Russian warship to go to hell, although in far cruder language. Snake Island was seized, and the Ukrainian soldiers were taken prisoner, but later exchanged for Russian captives. Ukrainian forces recaptured the island in June last year. The deputy head of the UN's Human Rights Monitoring Team in Ukraine, Noel Calhoun, said the 500th day was another grim milestone in the war that continues to exact a horrific toll on Ukraine's civilians. The UN estimates more than 9,000 civilians, including some 500 children, have been killed since the war began, although it said the real number could be much higher. Mr. Zelensky made his video address after spending time visiting European leaders ahead of NATO's summit in Vilnius this week, where the Ukraine war is expected to be high on the agenda. He also welcomed the news that the US would be supplying Ukraine with cluster bombs, a weapon that has been banned in more than 120 countries because they have a record of killing civilians. Both Ukraine and Russia have been using cluster munitions throughout the war, but the US's decision has proved controversial. Mr. Zelensky called the latest US arms package timely, broad and much needed, tweeting that it will provide new tools for the deoccupation of our land. Ukrainians who defended Azovstal steel plant are returning home with Zelensky. President says, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Saturday that 5 soldiers who defended the Azovstal plant in the southern city of Mariupol would return to Ukraine. We are returning home from Turkey and bringing our heroes home. Ukrainian soldiers denies Prokopenko, Sviatoslav, Palomar, Serhiy Volinsky, Oleg Komenko, Denis Shaha they will finally be with their relatives, Zelensky said in a Telegram post. In the video, Zelensky is seen meeting and hugging the men at an airport field before boarding a plane. The 5 Ukrainian soldiers surrendered following the fall of Mariupol. After their release from Russian captivity, they were taken to Turkey as part of a prisoner swap back in September, where they were obliged to stay until the end of the war, according to the terms of the swap. Zelensky was in Turkey to hold talks with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Background on Azovstal and Mariupol. The siege of the southern port city of Mariupol lasted almost 3 months, with the steel plant serving as a symbol of resistance and a final holdout as Russian troops advanced further into the city. The plant sprawled over 4 square miles and once employed more than 10,000 people, a mass of tunnels, pipes and chimney stacks perched on the Azov Sea. Russian forces shelled the facility day and night for weeks. The Ukrainians' last stand became increasingly desperate as food and water supplies dwindled and hundreds of casualties were left without adequate medical care. Huddled together underground in grim conditions, many soldiers and civilians began to doubt that they had ever escaped the plant alive, before negotiations led to a mutual ceasefire. British Prime Minister addresses cluster munitions. UK is part of convention that prohibits their use. United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak addressed cluster munitions a day after the United States said it will send the controversial weapons to Ukraine, but stopped short of directly criticizing the US for its decision. The UK is signatory to a convention which prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions and discourages their use. Sunak told reporters Saturday, "We will continue to do our part to support Ukraine against Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion. But we've done that by providing heavy battle tanks and most recently long-range weapons, and hopefully all countries can continue to support Ukraine," Sunak said. The Prime Minister also said the upcoming NATO summit will include discussions on how to strengthen support for Ukraine. About the weapons, cluster munitions, also called cluster bombs, are canisters that carry tens to hundreds of smaller bomblets. As the bomblets fall over a wide area, they can endanger non-combatants. Much of the world has banned the use of these weapons through the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which also prohibits the stockpiling, production, and transfer of them. The 123 nations have joined that convention. The United States, Ukraine, Russia, and 71 other countries have not. Both Ukrainian and Russian forces have used cluster bombs since Moscow invaded in February 2022. President Joe Biden told CNN Friday that it was a difficult decision to provide Ukraine with the bombs for the first time, but that he was ultimately convinced to send the weapons because Kyiv needs ammunition in its counteroffensive against Russia. Biden will deliver remarks on Ukraine at the high-stakes NATO summit. Here's what his schedule looks like. President Joe Biden will depart Sunday on a consequential days-long Europe trip that includes a host of bilateral meetings with allies amid the backdrop of Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine and last month's attempted mutiny in Russia. The White House detailed Biden's trip in a pool note to traveling reporters. Here's the schedule. Monday, Biden will meet with the United Kingdom's King Charles II and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to further strengthen the close relationship between our nations. Tuesday, Biden travels to Lithuania and holds a bilateral meeting with President Gitanas Nausėda. The U.S. president will attend the NATO summit Tuesday and Wednesday. Wednesday, Biden will deliver remarks highlighting how the United States, alongside our allies and partners, are supporting Ukraine, defending democratic values, and taking action to address global challenges. Thursday, Biden will participate in a bilateral meeting with Finland's President Sauli Niinisto in Helsinki and attend the U.S. Nordic Leaders Summit before returning to the U.S. It's mid-afternoon in Kyiv. Here's what you need to know. Saturday, 500 days since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and how or when the conflict might end is not yet certain. While Kyiv has launched its counteroffensive to try to drive Russian troops from the territories they have occupied, much of the war's outcome may be influenced by decisions made far away from the battlefield, mostly notably in Vilnius, Lithuania's capital, where NATO is set to hold a key summit beginning Tuesday. The high-stakes meeting has a packed agenda, including the alliance's expansion and assistance to Ukraine. Here are the latest developments. Turkey says Ukraine deserves NATO. Ukraine deserves to have full NATO membership, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said early Saturday following talks with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky while in the Czech Republic. One of several NATO countries the Ukrainian president visited this week. Zelensky said NATO needs to send a clear signal that Ukraine will be in the alliance. Sweden's membership bid stalled. However, Turkey is less ardent that Sweden should be admitted into the alliance. Ankara and Stockholm have been locked in a tense confrontation over what Turkey alleges to be the Swedish government's complicity in far-right protests by allowing copies of the Quran to be burned in public demonstrations.